は楽じゃないぞ。昔ほど楽じゃなさそうだ。目測を誤った。
本当に教師？
パートだね。
We gotta figure out how to get this one. This is the hero shot.
Since everybody's back.
This we can get. The bullet, when the gun hits, the bullet ricochets. Maybe hits this, goes right through, hits the metal, big spark. Maybe goes right through her legs, hits the metal with a big spark, and then everybody just kind of ducks. And that gives them the moment.
We actually came on to Indiana Jones as some of the first people involved. Steven would sit down with us and he'd say, I've got an Area 51 environment, and I want this to be in South Nevada, and I've got a diner, and I've got these characters. I've got Mutt, Mac, Oxley, obviously Indy and Marion. And here are the bad guys, here are the good guys. But it was funny because even though we knew a lot about what was going on, I never really had access to the script or any grand plan until much later in the process. So it sort of unfolded in front of us, you know, as sort of this mystical thing.
Now we have to see it unrolling though. He's got to fall out of frame. We got to see the thing unrolling.
Steven almost knows exactly what he wants right from the beginning and just tells you what it is.
Look, bam.
Bam, that's good. And I'll tell you something else I would do. I'd carry them in. I would pan them in. Instead of just holding on this, I'd pan them in because remember they're running.
Yeah.
They're running, so just take them down one of those aisles and just pan them into this frame.
Steven would draw things for us, and Steven's drawings are very rudimentary, but the amazing part is that they all work. He'll sit down and he'll sketch out just a little 1-minute drawing about a shot, put a frame around it, that's your framing, and then he'll do A, B, and C positions. And you go into Maya and do the 3D world, and it works. I mean, the lens works, the framing works, the timing works, everything works.
And then we cut in and he catches her.
Oh, okay.
And then we have dialogue like old times. He looks at her and smiles, says like old times.
And then to have that transcribe into an actual 3D working shot is pretty incredible. And that's basically how the process works.
But you know we don't have here, we don't have the geography of how this happened. So just have him stand up and get ready to, you know, time his jump.
Steven is definitely the focal point for the entire production. And through him, not only is our work important for Steven to help him flesh out his ideas, but then that work gets distilled and brought into all the different departments that cascade down from him. And they have this foundation and this start from which to, you know, begin the process.
Well, I said to my cameraman, Janusz Kaminski, let's not move Indiana Jones into a 21st century techno thriller. Indiana Jones has to stay traditional. And in order to do that, let's not change the lighting style from what Douglas Slocum established on the first 3 adventures. And he was on board for that.
We sat down at the screening room here at Emblem and we watched the previous 3 movies, and it was just amazing ride to see, you know, not just how the story progresses, but how the technology advances and how certain things became new, but yet there's a consistency in all the 3 stories, which is basically the visual representation of the story. It's very glamorous, it's very warm, it's very kind of high-key, it's an action adventure, it's occasionally suspenseful and dark, but it's never too dark and it's never too bright. It's got this very specific Hollywood glossy look to the picture.
I hadn't worn the Indiana Jones costume for 18 years. And early in our production process, the costume was sent to my house for me to try on, to see where we would have to change sizes. And I put it on and it fit like a glove. I felt really comfortable and ready to go.
With the iconic look of Indiana Jones, there's no updating really, except if you go back to Indiana 1 and 2 and 3, you're going to see nuanced differences in his look. And I was under great pressure for me to try to duplicate an iconic picture, and I had to come up with the right stuff. And through referrals and referrals, I ended up with a guy named Stephen Delk in Mississippi. And he came up with the perfect hat, great hat body, heavyweight and everything. And so I said, are you up to making me 30 of them? Well, I'll certainly try. I got a few hats in, and we did a screen test on all of his new clothes. And the first thing Stephen said when he saw the hat was, oh, great. He said, I lost sleep over thinking you would be able to come up with the hat, and I'm thrilled to death with the way the hats came out, and everybody seems to be happy with them. And the jackets, I found a guy named Tony Novak, and he came up with the greatest jacket. Everything was to perfection. And again, one of the sweetest guys. I said, now, can you do 30 of them? Yeah, I can do whatever you want. He brought me samples, and we picked out a sample of what color we wanted, and we did a few extra oversized in case we had to have extra padding. And he did a wonderful, wonderful job.
The hat is great, the whip is great. Harrison looks great in the hat with the jacket holding the whip.
You could take a still from each of the 4 movies of him in the hat and the coat, a full shot. And I don't think he'd be able to figure out which one was which, because he looks just like he did in all the other movies.
Isn't that great? Something like this is what we need to release first.
Okay.
We start releasing what Harrison
Okay.
looks like in the costume. Mutt enters Indiana Jones' life on a Harley Davidson, just like Marlon Brando in The Wild One. We even gave him a little bit of the Brando motorcycle hat. He comes out of a cloud of steam from a train about to leave the station. And I had no second choice for Mutt. When I saw Shia in Holes with my kids years ago, the Disney film, I actually said, he'd be great in an Indiana Jones movie. And DreamWorks put him in with DJ Caruso, the director of Disturbia, and later encouraged Michael Bay to use him in Transformers. I sent George Lucas dailies from Disturbia. George saw the dailies, loved Shia, and said, go ahead and cast him.
Literally the direction, the preparation that I got from Steven was, welcome to Indiana Jones. He wrote a little note on my script that said, okay, now it's time to transform yourself into Mutt, signed Steven, and he gave me 3 movies. He gave me Blackboard Jungle, Rebel Without a Cause, and The Wild One.
There was just some films that I thought would inform him of the period that we were making our film in, not trying to imitate that movie.
When we started, what was going to take the most time, and we knew was going to take the most time, would be the sword fight.
So hard. Oh, God.
Which kept evolving. We'd be moving so fast in training that the ideas started changing. Steven started going, okay, hold on, why don't we add this? Let's put 2 trucks here, let's put in the jungle.
Start the whole movie there. Start the whole movie about here.
The way that we had started was like a stand-up fight on the ground, and where we've ended up now is a whole different thing.
That would be perfect.
The goal is to get it to bounce off the shoe, you know?
Steven said at the beginning, we're gonna give you a switchblade. And we didn't have a switchblade coach, but I was able to take the knife home every night. So just me messing around with it, it became like my Tetris. It became the most interesting thing to do on set. It just became my video game. And I got pretty good with it. It just became like a fun thing. And I started showing Steven, oh, that's awesome. We're gonna add it somewhere. So that's how that came in.
I had no predisposition about Shia when I heard that he was Steven's choice to play my son. And I was comfortable with that because I have that degree of confidence in Steven. And he has turned out to be an inventive, unique personality with a real storytelling sensibilities, but also just a sweet guy. So it's been a pleasure to work with him, and it's been a pleasure to spend time with him.
The first time that I had seen Harrison in full regalia was Harrison flew in on his helicopter, and you look up and you hear the ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, and you know it's Harrison. And he gets out of the helicopter, and he takes about 5-6 steps, and he goes, oh, wait. And he walks back to the helicopter, opens the door, and then he reaches for something, and he pulls the whip out, and he untangles the whip, and he looks at it, and he greases it, and he holds it, and you're going, oh my God, this is so real. You're like shaking, your hands are shaking. You've just seen him do whip practice.
The whip came back pretty easily too. I was surprised because it's a relatively uncommon skill, and I was able to bring it back in a couple of weeks of pretty diligent application.
We did a costume and makeup test on Harrison, and I had to kind of walk out of the light a few feet just to take a few deep breaths before going back to work, because seeing him looking that good, it was kind of like, what happened to the last 19 years? How the heck did they go by that fast? My God. And that was scary, but it was also beautiful. And it was something we all shared together.
The people who are working on this film, the core group of us, you know, we're on the first Indiana Jones. We've known each other even before that, so we've known each other over 30 years. So it's a very family-type group.
To do it again with the same people is a mark of the respect that you have for what they've brought to the table. And so to be reunited with George and Stephen and Kathy and Frank, who were the original producers, is a great delight.
In keeping this movie to the tradition of the other films, I went back to my earliest producer, Frank Marshall, who produced Raiders of the Lost Ark and was very active on the other two movies, executive producing, and we had a great reunion. But of course, we were never that far away from each other. Our families have stayed close. We do carpool. Kathy, as you know, has produced a lot of my movies. So it's not like it was unusual for Frank, Kathy, and I to work together again, because we never stopped working together.
I think that's the interesting thing about this series, is that because so many of us work together, Frank, who I'm now married to because we met on the first Raiders.
Kathy and Frank, you know, they met on the first Indiana Jones and then eventually got married, and Kathy's been working with Stephen ever since. And, you know, so this is like a reunion of all of us coming back together again after all these years, and it's been a huge amount of fun.
Dr. Jones, we've heard a great deal about you. Have you? Professor of archaeology, expert on the occult, and how does one say it? Obtainer of rare antiquities.
Indiana Jones. Always knew someday you'd come walking back through my door.
When I was done with Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, there was a reason that I invented the shot of Harrison riding a horse into the sunset, because I thought that brought the curtain down on the trilogy, and then we were all going to move on and mature into other aspects of filmmaking, and I never thought I would ever see Indiana Jones again, which, by the way, in a sweet, nostalgic way, was fine with me at the time. But there were some people it wasn't fine with. And I think it started with the fans. And I really think that the first rumblings we heard was about 5 years later. And I was off, you know, doing a publicity tour on a movie I had directed. But I just remember people asking me, when are you making the next Indiana Jones? Now that question followed me everywhere I went, in this country and overseas. I'd get asked the question, inevitably, sometimes not even on camera, are you going to make another Indiana Jones picture? And that was a question that was not only asked of me, but it was asked of Harrison. And I know it was asked of George Lucas. All of us have been asked that question. Harrison was the person that took it seriously. And he finally called me and said, why don't we make one of these pictures? There's a fan base out there that wants it. And my attitude was always, oh, I've moved on and you've moved on and I'm making these historical dramas and that sort of thing. And Harrison was tenacious, and Harrison called George and got George thinking about it. Then George called me, and he said, well, Steve, what do you want to do? It could be fun to make another movie. And I was the holdout. I was the one that said, I'm done with this series. It was great. Let's walk away. And I have to give the credit to Harrison for starting the ball rolling, and then for George in working on me to get me to consider the possibility of more stories, or at least one more story.
There was an ongoing dialogue. There was a period of maybe 5 or 6 years where nobody anticipated doing another. And then we began to, each of us in our way, to think about the potential, the possibility of doing another. Having been out in the world making all kinds of other movies, I was happy to do another Indiana Jones film just because they're so much damn fun.
And then in 2000, there was an AFI tribute to Harrison. And we were all sitting there in our tuxedos, and we were watching on the screen, and we were seeing all these great clips, and people were telling wonderful stories. And we sat around afterwards and we said, you know, those were really fun. Maybe we ought to do another one, and we really ought to focus on this. And that's how it happened.
One of the things that I was worried about was when we made these movies, we captured lightning in a bottle. So one of the things that struck me, though, as a concern was, will the audience accept Harrison? Because when we first began talking about making another one of these pictures, Harrison was in his mid-50s, and now he's in his mid-60s as Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is about to open, and that was a concern for me. It was a concern when he was 55. Is he too old to play Indiana Jones? And he wasn't at 55, and by the way, he sure ain't at 65, and I'm sure he's got another 10 years left in him if he wants to do something like this again. Because Harrison was the secret weapon, and it made me realize that Harrison was the center of this piece from the very beginning. The casting of that man to play that role was the most important thing we did. And when I realized that the strength of Indiana Jones is the way we fashioned this for Harrison, that was the key for all of us.
You're a teacher?
Part-time.
George Lucas had this idea for Indiana Jones, and it was basically, hey, let's do aliens. And I said, George, I don't want to do aliens. I've done 2 alien movies. At the time, I had done E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, not in that order, but I had done both of those pictures. And I didn't want to do any more aliens. That was it. But George insisted, and he didn't. He said, this will be like a B movie. It'll be like those 1950s B movies, Earth versus Flying Saucers, and all those exploitation movies that were really about government paranoia, Cold War fears and things like that, and Hollywood turned them into invaders from Mars.
It was the idea of taking the genre from the 1930s serials, action-adventure serials, to the B science fiction movies of the 50s, in the early 50s. And I said, if we move the whole thing into the 50s, which would be age-appropriate for Harrison, that would be the cinematic equivalent. And I wanted to rest it on a cinematic antecedent like we did with the other one.
And I resisted, but I also never thought I'd be making Indiana Jones 4. So I guess I kind of humored George by going along with it, thinking, well, I'll never wind up directing this movie, though. I'll wind up producing it with George and somebody else. We'll get some young kid to come in and do this, you know. And then when we actually began to get close to a story involving extraterrestrials, Independence Day came out, which was a smash. And I said to George, I called George up after I saw the movie. I said, hey, this movie's really a lot of fun. It's brilliantly directed by Roland Emmerich. It's just got everything you want in a movie. It's got humor, and it's got drama. It's got things you've never seen before. It's got a mothership bigger than my mothership in Close Encounters hovering over a city in broad daylight. I said, come on, we can't do aliens, especially since Roland has done his alien picture.
I then sort of thought, well, maybe I could do a kind of, you know, there's a whole genre of ancient civilizations developed by aliens. And I said, well, maybe I could move it into that, you know, without flying saucers and see if that would work.
So then George came to me one day, I'll never forget this conversation, said, you know, you might be right about this alien thing. Maybe we shouldn't do aliens. There's too much of that stuff around. I said, George, I love you. That's the best news you've ever given me. He said, yeah, they're not aliens. They're kind of extra-dimensional. I said, what? He said, ever hear of string theory about different dimensions? I said, yeah. He said, okay, these are interdimensional beings. They're not extraterrestrials, they're interdimensional. So I said, fine, fine. And what are they going to look like? George said, look like aliens, but we'll call them interdimensional. But at that point, I thought that was kind of interesting. It kind of deepened the subject matter a little bit.
So once I started that, then we started getting on the right track and getting the script in shape, and then it finally became what it is. But it's been a kind of long road to get everybody to agree, and we're not going to do the movie unless all three of us agree on it.
So then I had this idea to bring in Jeff Nathanson, who had done 2 scripts for me, and he put some really good ideas together and gave us some guidance, some direction, especially on the story. He really brought some original elements to the story, and of course he has a storyboard credit that he shares with George, which I'm very happy about. But what I did later on was I went to who I call my closer, David Koepp, who has written a number of films, starting with Jurassic Park and Lost World. David wrote War of the Worlds, which I directed, and he's an accomplished director himself. And so I went to David and I said, David, I need help. And then he wrote the script that became the movie.
You kind of have to approach this movie as if the others never happened, but in the back of your mind realize that the rules were laid out previously and you still have to stick by them. So it's a bit of a balancing act, you know, and my feeling was I want to be respectful, I want to be mindful, but I also have to write something as if for the first time, you know, so try to have the audience in your head but not have them in your head. It's a real sort of tricky line that you got to walk.
I think David's sense of humor is the key to the way that he writes. I think that's what makes his characters so endearing and accessible and entertaining. So the fact that he also has this incredible ability to write action and understand, you know, the structure of how that works and how you build upon action and how you make things more exciting and suspenseful and all of those things. At the end of the day, it's all about the characters.
One of the things that I'm excited about is Marion Ravenwood.
Indiana Jones. About time you showed up.
Mom.
Sweetheart, what are you doing here?
Forget about me. You all right?
Young man, I specifically told you not to come down here.
It was so great to work with Karen again after all these years. She hadn't changed a bit.
I always knew one day you'd come walking back to my campfire.
Yep.
She is the same feisty Marion Ravenwood as she was when we released the picture in 1981.
I learned to hate you in the last 10 years.
I had heard rumors that this film was in the works for years and years and years. So somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought, wouldn't it be great if they were going to do a 4th one? And wouldn't it be fantastic if they brought my character back into it? But I can't say that I really, you know, believed that that was going to happen. So I'm just, actually I was at my studio one day and the telephone rings and I pick it up and I hear somebody on the phone going, I've got Steven Spielberg on the line for you. And he said, I guess you know why I'm calling. And I said, no, I don't. And he said, what, haven't you been watching television? Haven't you been reading the papers? And I said, no. And he said, we've just announced we're making the next one and your character, you're gonna be in it. We really want you to be in it. And I had sort of imagined maybe it would be a wonderful little cameo or something, but he told me how, you know, what a major role he wanted my character and me to play in the film. And when I read the script, honestly, I was just like very, very moved by it, by, you know, what they had done with the character and the wonderful kind of repartee between them as they sort of, you know, mend fences and sort of realize that they still love each other. And yeah, I just thought it was beautiful.
Honey, you gotta stop. We're gonna go off the cliff.
That's the idea.
Bad idea. Give me the wheel.
Trust me.
Marion remains as independent and strong as she ever was.
Dad, you never wrote any of that in the
Marion
letters?
Ravenwood is your mother.
For God's sake, Indy, it's not that hard.
And a lot of the comic fodder comes out of their relationship, and also out of the process of the revelation of his fatherhood.
He's a good kid, Marion. You should get off his back about school.
Mud,
Not everybody's cut out for it.
His name is Henry.
Henry, good name.
He's your son.
My son.
In the beginning, it was a daughter he didn't know about. And I thought that'd be a great thing. Steven actually didn't like that idea. And so David revisited the idea again as a son. And then this time we approached him with it. He sort of said, okay.
My name's Mutt Williams.
Mutt? What kind of name is that?
That's the one I picked. You got a problem with it?
In the beginning, it was approached kind of as he was a nerd. You know, he's kind of a straight-laced kid that wore suits and things. And then later on, we decided that that isn't really the way it should work. It should work that he's the wild kid, which is what Indy was to his father.
Dad! It's important.
Wait.
No, Dad, you listen. Junior!
So just like he was to his father, that's kind of going off and doing all the wrong things and disobeying and doing all this stuff. Now Indy's faced with the same mess.
Get on, Gramps!
You know, the curse returns in the form of his son.
So what are you, like 80? I always like the fact that his name's Mutt, and his father figures were kind of being switched in and out of his life. And so now you got a kid who never really had a stable father, who had a mother who lived a really intense life, never really had a normal upbringing. He's kind of lost. The way Steven always explained it to me was like man boy, where you got this person who on the outside is trying to present himself as something that he's really not. I'm a man, so look at this knife, look at this bike. I'm a man, look at it, And it's never that simple. I'm ready. Don't give these pigs a thing.
Clearly, I've chosen the wrong pressure point. Perhaps I can find a more sensitive one. Приведите женщину!
We couldn't do Nazis again, and I wouldn't have done that anyway. But because of the 50s, the other thing about the 50s was the Cold War, and the Red Menace, as it used to be known in America, and the threat of nuclear annihilation, nuclear intimidation. That was something that was in the headlines every single day, and so the Russians got the job.
Russians?
This ain't gonna be easy.
Not as easy as it used to be.
The skull was stolen from Akator in the 15th century. Whoever returns it to the
City Temple will gain control over its powers. I've heard that bedtime story before.
What the Indiana Jones movies have always done really well is play with existing mythology and bend it to their storytelling purposes, So everything in it is drawn from real mythology.
There may be hundreds of skulls at Akator, perhaps thousands. Whoever finds them will control the greatest natural force the world has ever known. Power over the mind of man.
There are crystal skulls, and there are large groups of people that believe all these things. So, could be true, could be not, we don't know. But the closer you can stick to real legends, the better the movie's going to work, I think.
A mind weapon. A new frontier of psychic warfare. That was Stalin's dream.
There was a lot of history about the Russians having a big program about mind control, ESP, all of those disciplines were researched to try to see if they could figure out other ways of having secret weapons. So that was very big in Russia, and we used that.
Imagine, to peer across the world and know the enemy's secrets, to place our thoughts into the minds of your leaders. And the best part? You won't even know it's happening.
Well, the original title on the original script was Indiana Jones and the Saucerman, and that's what I wanted it to be. And then it went from there to things even like Indiana Jones and the Attack of the Giant Ants.
I said, hey, let's call this Indiana Jones and the yada yada of the Mysterians, until I realized, wait, we can't call it that. There was a movie called The Mysterians, so we had to give that up.
I really, for a long time, thought the movie should be called Indiana Jones and the Son of Indiana Jones. That was my bright idea, but not really.
David Koepp had written out 25 titles. George wrote out some, I wrote out some, and the three of us basically came to the conclusion that, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom, which was a word George insisted on using, of the Crystal Skull was the right balance of mystery and being able to embrace our MacGuffin. But, all the traditions of Indiana Jones are back again. I wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel here. I wasn't trying to make this movie bigger or better. I wanted this to be a blood relative to the other three Raiders pictures. And I just think that we created Indiana Jones, but it belongs to the world. And now we're their custodians. And our job really is to serve up a huge helping of not only what Indiana Jones means to older people who grew up with it, but we need to reintroduce the character to those who didn't. And so those are my responsibilities.